My name is Margaret, but everyone calls me Maggie. I'm 63, and I raised my son alone after my husband died. For decades, I carried him through every scraped knee, every overdue bill, every heartbreak. Tonight, at my own retirement party, I learned exactly what that devotion was worth. I was walking back from the bar when I heard my new daughter-in-law's voice, sugar, sweet, and venomous all at once. She whispered to her friend that once I started forgetting things, they'd have me declared incompetent. Then, she laughed and said the beach house I'd built my life around would finally be theirs. That sound, her laugh, so casual, so certain, cut deeper than any betrayal I'd ever known. And in that moment, smiling at strangers with a glass of wine in my hand, I decided if they thought I was the helpless old woman in this story, they were about to learn how wrong they were. The ballroom at the Portland Country Club sparkled that night, lit with chandeliers and filled with laughter. Colleagues I'd worked beside for decades clinked glasses. Old students stopped by to hug me, and friends showered me with flowers. My retirement after 35 years of teaching was supposed to be a golden milestone, a night to celebrate the sacrifices I had made and the life I had built. From the outside, everything looked perfect. Wine flowing, music humming, voices warm with affection. I stood alone near the bar for a moment, letting the sound wash over me, trying to soak in what should have been joy. Then I heard it, just a few feet away. Melissa, my son David's brand new wife, leaned toward her bridesmaid from the wedding a few months back, voice low but clear enough to slice through the noise. "Just wait until she forgets a name or repeats a story," she whispered, her smile never wavering. "That's all we'll need to push for an evaluation. Once she's declared incompetent, the Cannon Beach house will finally be ours." The words hit like a blade. My hand trembled around the stem of my wine glass, the Pinot Noir quivering dangerously close to spilling. For a second, the world tilted. The chandelier still glowed, the laughter still rose, but to me, everything had gone hollow. Melissa didn't notice. She wrapped an arm around her friend's shoulders and laughed, radiant under the soft lights. To anyone else, she looked like the picture of charm, beautiful, polished, the perfect new bride. She caught my eye across the barroom and raised her glass with that same angelic smile she always wore, as if butter wouldn't melt in her mouth. A few feet away, David was deep in conversation with a former colleague of mine, oblivious. My son, my only child, who once promised he'd always take care of me, was laughing like the world was safe. He had no idea his wife had just revealed she planned to dismantle what little security I had left. I forced my lips to curl into a smile, lifting my glass in a silent toast back at her. To anyone watching, it must have looked like mother and daughter-in-law exchanging a polite glance of approval. But inside, my heart was pounding, my stomach burning with a mixture of betrayal and rage. The betrayal wasn't just Melissa's words, it was the ease with which she said them, as if I were a nuisance, a hurdle to be removed, as if the beach house, the place where my husband had proposed to me, where David had learned to swim in the icy surf, was nothing more than an asset waiting to be claimed. I felt the weight of decades, every sacrifice, every late bill I'd covered, every night I stayed awake after Robert died, building a life for my son, suddenly reduced to a scheme, a whispered plot at a party meant to honor me. Melissa's smile lingered, daring me to react. I didn't. I swallowed the lump in my throat, steadied my glass, and tilted it toward her in acknowledgement. My face carried the grace expected of a woman celebrating her career's end, but beneath the surface, something in me hardened. They thought they could corner me. That age would make me easy prey. They thought wrong. That night, Under the soft glow of crystal chandeliers and polite applause, I decided if Melissa had declared war, she was about to learn I wasn't a woman who surrendered quietly. There was a time when David called me every Sunday just to chat. He'd FaceTime me with that easy grin, sometimes holding up a bunch of tulips or roses on Mother's Day, just because, back then, I believed I'd done something right, raising him alone after Robert's death, teaching him to value family, to never forget where he came from. But lately, all I got were short texts. Melissa says I'm busy. Or Melissa thinks we should reschedule. The words weren't his. I could see her handprints all over them. He'd stopped sounding like my son and more like her mouthpiece. When they moved into the cabin at Crater Lake, a place I'd bought as an investment, fully in my name, Melissa wasted no time telling people it was the house David inherited. My stomach churned the first time I overheard her say it at a family gathering. Inheritance. As if I were already dead. The next shock came when I drove up one afternoon and found a shiny new Tesla parked in the driveway. David never could afford something like that, not on his little part-time consulting jobs that barely kept his head above water. The math didn't add up, and I knew exactly whose ambition was driving that purchase. I called that evening, my voice calm, even though my pulse hammered. Melissa answered instead of David, her tone sugary and practiced. "Hi, Maggie. We were going to get back to you. Money's just been tight with all the moving expenses, so we'll start rent next month." Next month, I repeated. A month that never came. Every visit confirmed what I feared. The furniture I'd chosen carefully for that cabin was gone, replaced with sleek white pieces that screamed Pinterest perfect but carried no soul. Melissa was erasing my fingerprints, room by room, while David stood silently beside her, smiling like it was normal. Still, the teacher in me knew better than to ignore red flags. I dug a little deeper, made a few calls. That's when I discovered Melissa's past. She'd once worked for Adult Protective Services, handling cases of elder abuse and competency evaluations. On paper, it sounded noble. But in reality, I saw it for what it was, the very expertise she could twist into a weapon against me. She wasn't just circling. She'd been training for this. That night, as David repeated Melissa's line, "Mom, you're too controlling," I realized something had shifted forever. The boy who once swore he'd protect me had vanished. In his place stood a man parroting his wife, blind to the trap she was setting. A week later, I sat across from Thomas, the family lawyer who had helped me through Robert's will, the insurance claims, even the rental agreement David signed for the pool house years ago. His office smelled of oak and leather, just like always. He listened quietly as I laid out my plan, brows furrowed in disbelief. "You want to sell both properties?" he asked slowly, his voice low, measured. "Yes," I said. "Both the Cannon Beach house and the Crater Lake cabin. Price them to move. I don't need to maximize profit. I need a clean break." Thomas leaned back in his chair, studying me. "Margaret, this will cause serious family strain." I met his gaze without blinking. The strain didn't start with me. It started the moment Melissa stepped into our lives. I asked him to open a brand new account at a different bank, one Melissa couldn't possibly trace. Every dollar from the sales would go there, sealed tight. Then I gave him one more task: investigate Melissa. Find everything: aliases, lawsuits, employment history, anything that smelled off. He scribbled notes, then looked up again. "Are you absolutely certain?" I nodded. More certain than I've been about anything in years. Days passed, each one weighed down by a silence between me and David that cut deeper than words. Then, one evening, the phone rang. Thomas's voice carried the confirmation I already feared. She was sued for elder abuse in another state, he told me, settled quietly. No conviction, but the pattern is there. I closed my eyes, inhaling slowly. My grip tightened on the receiver until my knuckles ached. It wasn't paranoia. It wasn't imagination. Melissa had done this before. As I set the phone down, a single thought settled in, sharp as glass. The game has already begun, and this time, I won't be the one to lose. One gray afternoon, I drove up to the cabin at Crater Lake with a folder in my bag. Inside was the lease agreement David had signed the day he moved in. I was done letting them treat me like some frail woman too timid to stand her ground. It was time to confront him face to face. When I laid the paper on the kitchen counter, David's eyes flickered with confusion, then irritation. He stammered. I thought that was just formality. Mom, you didn't actually mean... I cut him off. In law, nothing is just formality. Not until someone breaks it. His face flushed red. You're betraying your own family. You're destroying the home Melissa and I are building. I let my gaze wander deliberately across the room. The rustic chairs I'd chosen years ago were gone, replaced with sterile, showroom-perfect furniture. My quilts and framed photos had disappeared. The Tesla parked outside gleamed through the window like a trophy, while I knew the electric bills were still unpaid. David's voice rose, anger bubbling. He slammed his hand on the counter, and in that heated moment, he said more than he meant to. Melissa already scheduled when the house would sell. The money was supposed to fund her wellness startup. The words hung heavy in the air. I felt my stomach twist, but I forced my face to remain calm. That cabin was never just shelter to them, it was currency. My years of work, my sacrifice, reduced to seed money for Melissa's dream business. As I turned to leave, Melissa's voice floated after me, honey-coated and sharp as a blade. Go ahead. Sell it. The law will still be on our side. Who do you think they'll believe? A tired old woman? Or a young professional wellness coach? Her smirk confirmed what I already knew. She intended to use my age as ammunition, turning my years into evidence against me. I didn't answer. I simply smiled coldly, the kind of smile that says, "You've shown me your hand, and it's weaker than you think." Inside, I knew this wasn't just a squabble anymore. The game of power had officially begun, and they had just tipped their move too far. A few days later, my phone rang. Melissa's voice poured through the line, sweet as syrup, sharp as glass. "Margaret, you're controlling David. That's emotional abuse. We should consider family therapy. I know a doctor who specializes in this." By Tuesday morning, her therapy arrived on my doorstep in the form of a white van. Melissa and David stood beside a man in a pressed suit and a young nurse in scrubs. Their smiles were thin, their eyes watchful. "Mrs. Cooper." The man introduced himself. "I'm Dr. Franklin. Your family has expressed concerns. Sudden asset liquidation, isolating yourself, erratic decisions. A 72-hour evaluation will clarify everything." David avoided my eyes, repeating like a rehearsed line. "Mom, this is for your own good. You need help." I glanced at Melissa, arms folded, lips curled in that half smile of triumph. The nurse shifted nervously as I looked her up and down. "How old are you?" I asked. 34, she replied cautiously. I let my mouth curl into a wry grin. "So you're going to explain aging to someone who's been doing it nearly 30 years longer than you?" For a beat, silence. Franklin cleared his throat and pushed on with his script, but I had already made my decision. "I won't fight you," I said smoothly. "Let me pack a bag." Melissa blinked, almost startled by how quickly I yielded. She thought she'd won. That was her mistake. Upstairs, Behind the closed door of my bedroom, I dialed 3 numbers in quick succession. First, Thomas. "It's happening," I told him. "If you don't hear from me in a week, execute the plan." Second, the bank. "I need immediate access to my safe deposit box today." And third, a number Melissa didn't know existed, a federal contact, a man who once served with my late husband. "If I disappear into the system, you'll know where to find me, and you'll know who's behind it." By the time I rolled my suitcase back downstairs, my face was composed, my tone serene. Melissa was practically glowing with satisfaction. When the van door shut behind me with a metallic clang, I glanced at her through the tinted glass. She thought I was defeated, trapped. But in my chest, a quiet laugh rose. "Sweetheart, you just delivered me to the very place where I'll collect every piece of evidence I need to destroy you." As the tires crunched over the gravel and David's car followed behind, I caught his blurred reflection in the rearview mirror. His eyes were dull, uncertain. In that fleeting moment, I knew my son was lost, blinded by her, and it would fall to me, not with tears, but with truth, to bring him back. The white van rolled through the gates of Serenity Valley Mental Health Center, and my stomach clenched. The place looked pristine, whitewashed walls, sterilized hallways, motivational posters that read, "Healing starts here." But I knew better. This wasn't a sanctuary. It was a polished cage for people like me, people others decided were inconvenient. Dr. Summers, barely old enough to be my granddaughter, met me with a clipboard. She launched into her tests, dates, names, who the president was. I answered each question clearly, never faltering. She tried to trip me with roundabout phrasing, questions meant to twist my words, but I matched her calm for calm, patience for patience. And all the while, I stored away every detail, the way she glanced at her notes, the tight line of her mouth, the way the nurse hovered in the corner. That first night, I lay awake listening to the muffled sobs of frail women abandoned in their rooms. The sound clawed at me. Breakfast came on a plastic tray the next morning, eggs cold and rubbery, toast limp. I couldn't help thinking of the Pinot Noir I'd sipped the night of my retirement, the bitter contrast between celebration and captivity. While checking my blood pressure, a nurse about my age leaned closer. Her badge read, "Angela." Her voice dropped to a whisper only I could hear. "I've seen this before. Daughters-in-law, sons-in-law, they build a case to steal the assets. Most of the time they win, because the old folks don't know how to fight back." She looked directly into my eyes. "Do you?" My heart thudded in my chest, but I gave the smallest of nods. The following evening, Angela brushed past me during rounds and slipped a brown envelope into my lap. I hurried it under my blanket until I could open it in private. My hands shook as I slid out the documents. Melissa's past laid bare, a fraud conviction in Nevada, 2 civil suits for elder abuse, settled quietly out of court, a list of aliases, different names she'd used to cover her tracks. For the first time since being hauled here, a smile tugged at my lips. I clenched the envelope tight, pulse quickening with something close to triumph. "Melissa," I whispered to myself, "you just handed me the weapon that will destroy you." By the 3rd day, Dr. Summers folded her hands across her notes. "Mrs. Cooper," she said carefully, "you show no signs of cognitive decline, just stress, perhaps complicated family dynamics." I lowered my head, disguising the flare of victory. "I see," I murmured, though inside I was practically laughing. When Melissa and David came to pick me up, Melissa radiated the same angelic smile as always. We've all learned something from this, haven't we, Mom? I returned her gaze evenly. Yes, tonight. Why don't you both come over for dinner? Let's start fresh. David agreed too quickly, desperate, like a drowning man clinging to driftwood. He had no idea he'd just agreed to walk into the lion's den. On the drive back, Melissa prattled on from the passenger seat. Family is everything. Communication heals wounds. I sat in the back seat, catching my reflection in the rearview mirror. My lips curved into the faintest smile she couldn't see. The moment I stepped inside my house, I began making calls. Thomas, I told my lawyer. Have everything ready tonight. To the federal contact. 7 o'clock, I'll need 2 unmarked cars. To Angela, I'll take every copy you made of Melissa's records. Deliver them before sundown. Then I called a catering service, ordered a lavish spread, wine, candles, flowers, the works. It wouldn't be a family dinner. It would be a trial, staged at my own table. Later, I paused in front of the mirror. The woman staring back at me wasn't frail or defeated. She was steady, sharp, dangerous. The lines on my face weren't weakness, they were armor. I raised my glass in the dim light, the flicker of candles painting my reflection. My voice was quiet but firm. Tonight's dinner will be Melissa's last as a free woman. At exactly 7 o'clock, the doorbell chimed. David and Melissa stood on the porch, dressed as if this were a casual family visit, a bottle of red wine in David's hand. They looked confident, Melissa glowing with the same effortless charm she always wore. I ushered them inside where candlelight flickered across the dining room. The table was dressed like a magazine spread, fine china, roses in crystal vases, silver polished to a mirror shine. What they couldn't see was the quiet presence in the next room, my attorney, Thomas, and 2 federal agents waiting for my signal. Melissa raised her glass first, her voice smooth, triumphant. Here's to a new beginning. I tilted my head, smiled, and answered, yes, a new beginning indeed. Then I gave a small nod. The air shifted as the agents stepped out from the kitchen. Their suits looked almost out of place in the glow of candles and flowers. Melissa froze, color draining from her face before she quickly composed herself. What is this? She demanded, her voice a notch too high. I didn't bother with theatrics. My gaze fell to her left hand. That ring you're wearing, I said evenly, doesn't belong to you. It once belonged to an elderly woman in Nevada who died alone in a care facility after you tricked her into signing over her estate. David's head snapped toward her, eyes wide, disbelief flooding his face. Melissa. His voice cracked under the weight of realization. Melissa's lips parted, but before she could answer, one of the agents stepped forward, reading from the file in his hand. Fraud. Falsification of medical records, elder abuse. Each word landed like a hammer, stripping away the perfect image Melissa had so carefully built. Her mask shattered. She lunged forward, shouting, "You've ruined your son's life just to prove you're right." I rose from my chair, my voice low but steady. "No, I've just saved him." The room fell silent except for the clicking of handcuffs. Melissa thrashed once, then sagged in defeat as the agent secured her arms behind her back. The glow of the candles no longer softened her face. It only cast shadows over the rage twisting her features. As they led her out, I watched the darkness swallow her smile for good. David collapsed into a chair, burying his face in his hands. His shoulders shook, his voice breaking in sobs that filled the room where laughter should have lived. And I stood there, steady, the echo of Melissa's words still hanging in the air, but so was mine. This was not the destruction of my family. This was its rescue. The door had barely clicked shut when silence swept in, heavy and unrelenting. The echoes of Melissa's shouting faded into the night, leaving behind only the faint scent of roses wilting on the table and the sharp tang of wine spilled across the hardwood floor. The candles guttered low, their wax dripping in uneven lines down to crystal holders. What was staged as her triumph had become her downfall. David hadn't moved from the chair. His body folded in on itself, hands pressed against his face, shoulders heaving. The quiet sobs breaking out of him didn't sound like a grown man. They sounded like the little boy I once carried through storms, the boy who had cried into my chest when he thought monsters hid under his bed. My heart clenched at the sound, even as part of me hardened against it. Finally, through his tears, his words spilled. "I trusted her more than I trusted you," he gasped, voice torn open. "I believed everything she said, and I let her. I let her do this to us." The confession pierced me deeper than I expected. It wasn't just about Melissa. It was about every moment he chose her voice over mine, every time he repeated her words like scripture, every look of irritation when I tried to warn him. For months, it was as though he had been stolen from me in plain sight, and now here he was, broken at my table. I pulled a chair beside him, sat down slowly. My hand found his shoulder. It shook beneath my palm. "David," I said, my voice low but steady. "Forgiveness doesn't mean forgetting. It doesn't mean pretending this never happened. You have to learn to stand on your own again, without her, and without leaning on me to clean up the pieces every time." He turned toward me, his eyes red-rimmed, swollen from crying. And in that raw face, I caught a flicker of something familiar. A boy clutching my hand on his first day of kindergarten, his fingers clammy with fear that I might leave him. I remembered kneeling down, promising him I'd always come back. That little boy had lived in my son once, for a long time. I thought Melissa had buried him for good. The room around us sagged into quiet. The dinner table was a battlefield of half-filled wine glasses and untouched plates, a grotesque parody of family harmony. The scent of extinguished candles hung heavy, the last flame sputtering into smoke. The only sound was David's ragged breathing and the ticking of the clock on the mantel. He whispered then, almost childlike, "I don't know how to fix this." "You start small," I told him. "Step by step, you own your mistakes. You build back trust, not just with me, especially with yourself, because if you don't believe in your own strength, you'll always let someone else dictate who you are." He flinched at my words, like they struck deeper than I intended. For a moment, he looked away, ashamed. Then, with a shaky exhale, he lifted his gaze back to mine, and in that gaze, I saw it. The recognition. Not the blank eyes of a man parroting someone else's script, but the genuine look of my son, the boy I raised. The sight pulled a lump into my throat. It wasn't absolution, not yet. Too much had been broken, too much needed mending. But it was the first fracture in the wall Melissa had built between us, a small crack that let the light in. David's lip trembled as he nodded slowly, a gesture both fragile and resolute. He whispered, "I'll try, Mom." For the first time in a long while, I allowed myself a small smile. It wasn't triumph. It wasn't victory. It was something quieter, something truer. A beginning, delicate, uncertain, but real. And as I looked at him through the smoke of dying candles and the remnants of a night that had nearly destroyed us, I thought, perhaps this is what survival looks like. Not revenge, not even justice, just the slow, painful rebuilding of what almost slipped away. David's eyes held mine a second longer. In them, I finally saw my son again. And in that fragile, flickering moment, I knew this was a start. A beginning worth holding on to. 6 months later, the rhythm of my life had settled into something calm, something mine. The condo I bought on the Oregon coast wasn't large, but it didn't need to be. Its balcony opened straight to the Pacific, where every morning I cradled a glass of Pinot Noir and watched the horizon blaze with the reds and golds of dawn. The crash of the surf became my clock, steady and certain. Each sunrise reminded me that endings could carry within them the seed of something better. David was finding his footing again. He'd taken a steady job at a local firm, with real hours and real responsibility. Therapy was helping him untangle the knots Melissa had tied around him. For the first time in years, I saw him standing without leaning on me and without hiding behind someone else's words. Every month, he came for dinner. At first, the meals were stiff, awkward pauses hanging between us like uninvited guests. But slowly, those gaps filled in with genuine conversation. We didn't pretend the past hadn't happened. We lived with it, acknowledged it, but we let space for trust to return, brick by careful brick. Melissa was behind bars, sentenced to 5 years in federal prison. It should have felt like closure, but the truth was messier. Restitution had been ordered, though most of her victims would never see their money again. Still, knowing her schemes had been stopped brought a grim sort of relief. The mask she wore so well, the one that fooled my son, had finally been torn away where she could never hide it again. One afternoon, as the sun poured through my kitchen window, my phone buzzed with a new message, a number I didn't recognize. "Mrs. Cooper, this is Sarah Chen. My father's new wife is trying to isolate him the same way Melissa did to you. Detective Morrison gave me your number. Could we talk?" I set the phone down, staring at it for a long moment as the waves rolled in steady rhythm outside. The universe, it seemed, wasn't done with me yet. I carried my glass of wine onto the balcony. The air was cool, salt-tinged, the sky still painted with the afterglow of dawn. I listened to the surf pounding the shore with a force that was both relentless and reassuring. I let the strength of it seep into me. Then I lifted my glass, the sunlight catching the deep ruby of the wine, and smiled. "Being a mother doesn't mean being a doormat," I whispered into the ocean air. "Love doesn't mean surrender. Love requires boundaries." I picked up my phone again, typed my reply, and hit send. Of course. "Tomorrow. Let's meet." As the message whooshed away, the horizon brightened, the sun climbing higher, spilling light across the waves. My story hadn't ended with surviving Melissa. I had turned my pain into armor, my scars into strength. The dawn stretched wide and clear, and for the first time in years, I felt the fullness of peace. I hadn't just reclaimed my life. I had claimed the power to protect others who couldn't yet see their way out of the shadows. I raised my glass once more to the ocean, to the rising sun, and to the promise that sometimes the darkest nights yield the most radiant mornings.